Brotherhood of the Wolf, Part 2, Fanfiction. The mid-autumn air was crisp, with the full moon as bright as ever before. The light from the small log cabin came into view, although the scent caught their noses far earlier. A fine red cloak, a forest, if memory serves. It was late September 1808, and the cold north winds began blowing, sending the first of the dying leaves to their final trek down to the frost-bitten earth. The group of soldiers sat and waste near the warm fire. It was a welcome change for the men and their first chance to rest in such a long time. Still battered and bruised, they've lost all track of time. Even day and night became one. They haven't slept for days, so when the doors blew in, the icy breath opened. They nearly cried. The three masked hunters walked in slow motion, allowing the cold breeze to catch their breaths in smoke. After closing the doors, they removed their French triangle hats and trench coats. The captain of the guard stood up in a reasonable attention, tossing a bag of golden coins on the table. Half now, half if you come back. You are crazy, the young man shouted under his breath. The captain shot a fierce eye at the man as the man faded out, looking back at the three dark figures before him. You do know what you're up against, right? They turned, grabbed the satchel, and disappeared as sudden as they arrived, leaving only the cloth black mask waving in their tired memories. Like every day, the rustle of the townspeople began the way it does every sunrise before allowing ample the streets to cluster with people. Considering the size of the town, by 11, the bright sun glare off the vast Pacific, making the air even more cheerful. Children played amongst themselves as their parents yammered to each other about nothings. Otherwise, they shopped. Large two-horse carriages raced by, allowing coming or going. The docks were always packed year-round, and although it stayed busy, the townspeople never minded. In fact, on the contrary, they were proud to be just a part of it all. Steady men, stand fast, here she is. From the rise of the day, an enormous ship came into view, by far the greatest of all the ships. The Agamemnon seemed to soar above the swaying ocean. The grand sails seemed to carry her on the sun itself. Slowing to a halt, dropping anchor, and extending the ramp, or the onlookers watched. Dozens of men became ants, moving the wooden crates as fast as their legs would carry. Careful with those, you worms, or it'll be your hides. A tall, dominating man schemed in from in front of the rudder. Quite right. The finely, the finely dressed yet half the size man quietly intertwined. It would cost less to simply have them shot. While pulling on his handlebar mustache. You can handle it from here, Thomas? I have other arrangements to attend. Not even turning around for confirmation, Sir Edgar McCourt raced off his prize to his waiting carriage. Home, Reginald. Very good, sir. They sped off. They spread out off the of the town and into a nicely placed gravel road that wind through a redwood forest. It was the most beautiful landscape in the newly forged country. Moving down the hill, you couldn't watch these trees sprawl out as far as their eye could see. And yet Sir McCart sat in his carriage, window up, curtains closed. He hated this place. If it were up to him, he would have never left his beloved England. It was his daughter's adventurous spirit that carried him all the way, and he could never let her alone in such a barbaric part of the world. As they exited the forest, the new Catholic homestead, the new Catholic homestead appeared as they opened to a stop at the mammoth, at a mammoth 15 foot, at the mammoth 15-foot doors. They opened with an entourage, butlers commanding their servants, who in turn opened the carriage door. Marquardt was out and through the doors, without muttering a word, barely even a glance. He simply walked up to his Victorian-styled stairs, which formed the centerpiece of his immaculate ensemble. As he walked down the hall, his precious daughter was standing out on the balcony in one of her irritating moods. "Julianne," in a tender voice no one would ever believe, "why do you waste such time standing at nothing?" She slowly turned, opening her eyes, revealing the most beautiful smile in any land. "Daddy, daughter, you're nearly a woman, and act should act accordingly. Oh yes, I'll get married, have babies, and waste away doing pointless tasks to make my husband happy." Precisely. Obviously not catching the sarcasm, she turned out to a majestic landscape where the most beautiful and amazing thing could happen. Chapter 3. Even on the brightest day, the heart of the wild forest remained dark as night, and since this land was new to the settlers, the friendly, carefree vision proceeded. The natives of this land, on the other hand, had a great many legends on this forest, like every other forest, mountain, lake, or bird. But even they moved a little quieter and swifter in these parts, for their ancient chieftain tells of a beast that once was man and now only lives to stalk them. But stories are only fairy tales for children bedtime, so the carriages stay on their many ways doing their important tasks when a young man stuck his head out of the window. "How much longer till we arrive?" "Not long," the guidesman riding alongside shouted. "No more than an hour." "Excellent," working his way back inside. "Not much longer. Just wait until you see our new life." His beautiful wife reached over, kissing him on the cheek. Then, with the erratic noise, the horses began to fidget, rocking the not-so-sturdy carriage and sending her into the floor. My word, he stumbled, reaching for her when, with a great slam, the carriage flipped. Chapter 4. Like any town, there was a pub that contained the most lovely people. A lovely tan-skinned girl sat at the bar, ordering shot after shot of the driest whiskey in the place, which caught the attention of a drunken card player in the corner of her table, who tapped one of his buddies and whispered something in his ear, to an eerie grin slimed out of their faces. Well, their rotten faces. before all four surrounded their prey. Hey, Robert, baby, you, you come on to us. Yeah, yeah, good times, Purdy. And with the slam of light from the now opened front door, a dark image appeared engulfed in the blinding white. Now they were drunk and dumb. They could sense the terrible fate that stood before them, and in accordance with the bar law, they cracked their beer bottles and poured them and pulled their knives. They cracked the beer bottles and pulled their knives. But before they could move, the bottles went flying, along with their dull masters, to the side of the wall, and another swift kick came as the last. Knife flew from one of their hands, landing in the chest of their instigator, leaving their heads sore and bewildered. One turned and charged the door, only to be clotheslined by the dark figure. I didn't tell you to interfere. The tall man took a seat at the bar. It was just It just looked like you were having so much fun. I couldn't contain myself. She slammed the remaining shot. Came to, come on, it's getting late. He replied, not in a school voice. But I just got here. And yet she was already out the door. As they walked out, they found a man covered in blood, racing into town on a horse, shouting a bunch of babble. Able to tell the horse wasn't stopping, the tall man took a few quick steps, leaped over, and injured the animal, pulling the rider off. And although he was stunned, the terrified man couldn't shut up, so she slapped him. They're dead. They're all dead. The horses, the... Slap again. He finally fell silent. Where? Can you show us? No, I won't go. Slap again. Get Reed. We leave in 5. As she tossed him in the horses to cool down and cleaned him up. Chapter 5. As usual, Reed was busily and patiently on the trail, seeing the horse minutes earlier, and unwilling to waste precious time. It wasn't hard to find his way. He was actually disappointed with the ease, and he arrived at the carriage. As he arrived, the carriage was in splinters, and his horse slashed through the blood-soaked ground. No, and yet there were no bodies. Not even the horses. Not even the horses remained. Reed was born with eyes like a hawk, and followed the mammoth tracks from the wreckage to oblivion 12 feet previous. And as he turned to look back, a drip of crimson caught his shoulder. Raising his head and catching the next, he looked up. A devil's Christmas tree. My God. He was expecting the beast to be strong, but to be able to lift 2 horses 50 feet into the redwoods, he doesn't like to be surprised, and yet he had an aching feeling this wasn't to be the last. And still no tracks. Ah, so be it. It didn't take long for the other 2 to arrive, and by this time he was already aggravated and about to leave. I knew you 2 would bring him. Always the easy way with you 2. Jasmine gave the pale guide a glance that sent him on his way, nearly squealing like a roasting live pig. It didn't take long to bring them to speed. Reed deducted with the layout of the corpses, the beast headed north, and with their masks dropped and their weapons secured, They took flight, only to find an uneventful night. Chapter 6. The next day was business as usual for the town except for the early morning hanging, which the judge decided to leave up for the day as a stern lesson. Sir McCart declared that Julianne joined him into town today, and in which she was so overwhelmed she was in the carriage before breakfast was even served. So reluctantly she went back in and ate with her father, who made it a point to explain how irritating she was being. She loved taking trips, even if her father wasn't with. There was love there somewhere. It was just hard to find sometimes. The healthy, dark-haired girl spent in a spunky mood all morning, not listening to a word. She couldn't wait. Unlike every other trip, she was going to rebel and do what she wanted to do. As soon as they arrived, she sprang like a cheetah. Julie, her father, flared, knowing it was already too late to stop her. The emotion overwhelmed her. So crazy, such unbelievable act of defiance. It was invigorating. She skipped through the town, people, her light blue dress seamlessly waving to all of them. She was finally just Julianne, not Mrs. McCart. Her emotions charged her like a train, not allowing her to stop. In fact, she ran clear out of town to the lush green edge of the wilderness, turning to a rolling stop, hazing at her ever-changing clouds of the high above. Being overspent, she fell into a nap of sweet dreams. It must have been a half an hour before a tall porter woke her. Your father was worried about your outburst and figured I could talk some sense into you. Julie looked up to find Thomas, her father's ship captain, kneeling above her. What, she whispered in a sleepy tone, still not awake. Talk some sense into me. She sat up with a look he's never seen before. Haven't you ever needed to just go? She spit fire, making him fall backwards. What would make you do such a thing, worrying your father so? Turning away and getting to her feet. Like father, like duh. So she bolted, trying to get away, only to be snatched by the arm before she could move. Your father gave me very specific instructions to bring you to him, and I've never disobeyed an order. You will release your hand from that woman now. They both turned to find an enormous man jumping from his black horse. The trench coat seemed to hypnotize them into slow motion. You will mind your manners and be on your way. Thomas scuffed back, released the entranced woman as the stranger got too close for comfort. There was something about his eyes, like the razor slits were where demons could peek through. Her father moved even closer, making Thomas fall silent. Now leave. Something came over the tall man, never before, and with another word, he realized, releasing his gaze from the interrogation. From the ingrate, he revealed a soft glance to Julianne. She immediately went to ease. Are you okay? Taking a moment to realize what just happened. Ah, yes, thank you. Yet you've only postponed this. Your husband? She giggled, turning away for a second. My father could see to it. If my father could see to it. Well, I biddy you do, madame. I biddy you do, madame. Bowing, removing his hat. She never encountered such a man. Unshaven, almost on the right dirty. She was flattered. What? Realizing he was already back on his horse. What's your name, gallant sir? He relieved a kind smile. Marcus. Me lady and you. Me lady and you. Julianne McCart, now glowing. Please, if you like. He nodded and again removed his hat, placing it onto a stump on the placing it to the stamp on the saddle. To the stump on the saddle. They spent the entire evening together, walking the many trails, and since this was the first time in town, he had a joyful encounter. Chapter 7. What? Sir Edgar raged. And you left her with this animal? Thomas had an ashamed posture about him, taking the vicious assault, hands down. He deserved it. He knew it. He never has failed. And now, in the worst possible way, you will find who this impostor is. Get men ready. I will be in charge of this fowler from here on out. The door slammed behind him, and he heard the fury tear through the walls of McCart's Lake side office. Thomas walked out the door, where a few loyal workers waited. A hatred ripped through his being. I'll go find him, report back, and kill him. It was a number of days before any word came through. Thomas walked around a number of hours before any word came through. Thomas walked around the building to the alleyway where the young soldier waited silently in the shadows and jumped as the tall figure came into sight. You have something for me? Shh! The soldier shivered, moving in closer. I could be hung. No one's to know of the hunters. By Captain's order, Thomas grabbed the whimpering man by the collar, lifting him clear into the air. That means nothing to me. Answer. Chapter 8. From branch to branch, the dark figures swept quietly, 9 foot tall, moving like a 1-pound cat. The only sound was made an occasional grunt that was much less dominating than the moon's reflection off the bottom incisors. Although it was silent amongst the trees, the beast caught a whiff of something and went motionless. Slowly, the three moved into position. They'd been making bodies for days and got round about feel of the path, and as luck has it, its moldy smell caught their noses, the smell of blood, death, and wet fur. The rain made it hard to catch the proper angle, but no bother. They never missed their mark. With masks down, they felt nothing in the landscape, yet knew the beast was aware of their presence. Reed squinted his eyes, pulling his two boomerangs from his side of his back of his trench coat, and catching a shift in the branches, he launched the first one halfway, the second. Stunned, it stunned the man-beast, darted from its hiding place only to be stunned again. Jasmine sent a volley of steel arrows through her arm bow. For a moment the sky twinkled from the lighting flashes off of them, only to be turned red with the splashing of blood rain. A decisive blow, but nowhere near sufficient. Marcus lay waiting ahead of the beast, stayed his hammer, and as it passed he cracked it in the skull with all his might, and still it managed to land 2 more punches before it fell into the river below. The three moved like phantoms around the spot. Only stillness persuaded. They searched. but no body was found. Chapter 9. Julianne couldn't take it anymore, so she ran away. For 7 days he bellowed after her, and she couldn't take it anymore. With only her small pack and good wishes, she wandered the woods into town. There was only one in the area she'd been, and from there she caught a passageway. She she caught she could get a passageway away. From there she could get away from the town to another town by gaining passage. Night had sent by the time she arrived. Now being mid-October, she was cold and hungry. Being never in need of money, she was ignorant to bringing it. Then, as she thought the luck struck bottom, the crescent moon covered the rain. The crescent moon covered, and rain once again dropped from heaven. "Darned it!" she shouted, stomping in the newly formed puddle. Finding cover under a bar cover overhang, she curled into a ball, shivering. "Excuse me, madame. Could I be of assistance?" Jamie lifted her head to find an unimposing man with his hand stretched out towards her. He had quite a quaint smile, and he had a quaint smile, and his pearly whites glimpsed with a soft, shaven face. "Come now, let's get you out of this harsh weather." They ran across the street to the local hotel. She had never known such kindness. He paid her room, had the servants bring up food and warm clothes, and wanted nothing in return. He actually was about to leave when lightning crashed into the world, making her jump up to the door before he had a chance to open it. "Why, I never. Now, how would I look if I let you out of this room tonight?" But seeing the expression this pretty little thing's face, he subsided. They talked all night, not even realizing it, which was obscene. Reed has never talked to a person. Impossible. Rose, she talked herself right to sleep. Oh, wait. And as the sun arose, she talked herself right to sleep. Chapter 10. "Sir, I have interesting news on this trespasser." In a low, emphatic tone, McCourt leered in the disturbance direction. "I have learned that there are 3 total. Some kind of specialized hunter called in by Captain Howard." Sir Edgar pulled at his whiskers. "Why would Howard call for hunters in these parts?" "Not to hunt those annoying squirrels." "No, sir." Now in a more consistent voice, "Apparently some creature called a Sasquatch attacked his battalion, leaving only a handful." The sinister little man's eyes whined. "You impertinent little fool. There's no such thing. You've been made a fool of." "No, sir. I've seen his men, and although I can't prove it, there's a real record. They're not real men." He squinted and moved closer. Thomas reached to his vest and pulled out a still shot. McCord pulled down his eye lens and walked near the fire. "What is this?" "It was taken 1 year ago in Mexico. They hunted for 5 months. The soldiers said the Mexicans are big on dogfighting. They torture the dogs, making them vicious to any animal. Apparently one got a hold of its owner, and well, you see what happened." "This was the owner? How?" "Some illness in the dog. After the attack, the man became sick. Every time a dog barked, he turned into a dog man. You see the result. A dog man. Edgar's eyes twinkled. I want you to get a dozen of your strongest men and keep them on standby. Now looking more devious than ever. I had a bad, I have a bad feeling. Chapter 11. Days passed, but no beast, no tracks, bodies, nothing. The band must have skewered the entire forest 4 times. Jasmine pounded her thigh. You don't believe that bastard really croaked, do you? She looked back and found them both in a dreamy daze. He am speaking to you, turning as if they were shot. Now the three were never big on words, but she screamed something for the last week or so, only throwing it off. I'll pass when the beasts. She had thought to herself. I started to bother her. The parents ignored her. What the hell's going on here? She screamed, making the resting birds high above take flight. The two looked at each other, just blew it off, and went on ahead. Another pointless trek, and decided to return to town. A discouraging aura floated with them on the way, causing them to persuade causing them to preside a bit slower than usual. As they arrived, Reed took the horses to the side of the road to feed. Jasmine, still furious, headed to the bar, and Marcus continued up the road, where the sweetest voice called out, "Marcus, wait for me." He turned to find Julianne walking down the steps of the local hotel. He went and met her halfway and received a hello kiss on his stubby cheek. Reed's face went blank. It wasn't until later that night when Marcus went to find his comrade, still in the bar. "Hello, my friends." Reed's face turned black, and within an eye blink, Marcus dodged a flung shot glass, turning his cheery grin into just a dumbfounded, "What the?" Nearly catching a left hook in the cheek, they tore into the bar and turned the bar to shreds, sending customers running scared. And as the bartender pulled his shotgun from behind the counter, Reed already had it, soaring to the wall. The barkeeper's eyes were crossed, trying to watch the slow-motion flash attack. These men were sending out their arsenal. Jasmine quickly got to Reed, giving Marcus one of the "get out now" looks, agreeing, more confused than the bartender. He retreated out of the bar. Only moments after he arrived. Damn, that's twice worth out. That twice without a drink, he thought to himself. Twice without a drink. Chapter 12. It was the longest night of Marcus ever remembered. He decided to stay in town, because if Reed was content on continuing, he would have less than go. He stayed in town. His mind raced. Why would he? Such anger. They've worked together for years. Been across Africa, South America, Mexico, and never emotions. Such a drunken brawl broke loose now and again. But this, Jasmine was right. Something on underfoot and ill. A chatter of mixed voices cut him from the train of thought. Turning to investigate, it was too late. A wooden bat caught him across the face. He darted back, dodging the next, only to be caught in the back by another invader. There must be a dozen or so men carrying torches and completely surrounding his escape. It's true, they were no match for him, but in his they current mindset and their overwhelming numbers, it didn't last long. He fades to black. 3 weeks went by, and there was no sign of Marcus or the beast. Reed dropped into an overpowering urge of depression and eagerness. He won't let it end like this, not while he still lives. They searched everywhere, asked townspeople, even Julianne, who unfortunately felt responsible. Don't worry, my father knows powerful people. I will find something. Chapter 13. Chained, chained, beaten, wound up. He would never talk. His dead hand had a better chance to write the answer than his mouth ever would have unveiled. Most of the time he was unconscious, and it was so blurry he could barely see anything anyway. He recognized Thomas and 2 others from the assault, but around a week ago, a new group took over. Like the scent changed, like the scents changed. Something Scandinavian, maybe. So did the agent. So did the agenda. They began asking about the Sasquatch, his travels, his colleagues. They beat him for hours. They assumed even while he was they assumed even while he was unconscious by the feel of it. It was the first day in a long time he awoke to nothing. Complete silence, not even a guard he would need not that he would need one. It stayed quiet for an hour or so, then only to have water splash in his face by a little man, like the Monopoly guy, gone bad, and have hair. Where's my daughter? Where have you hidden her? Where, what have you done with her? It's your fault. You damn you, smacking him repeatedly in the face, and when Marcus tried to answer, it wasn't loud enough. McCord smacked him again. If you don't answer, I'll line both of your friends up right next to you and make you hear them tormented. Oh, I make it worse than yours. You have my word. An untaped rage charged his soul. He charged, unable to get closer. This ringleader of demons. Ha ha ha. Good, you still have fire in your belly. And I was sure you'd be gone in a few days. He turned and got to the door. Until you spent my little girl wet. Until you spent ... my little gerbil ... The door slammed, and he headed, and the laugh continued. He fades back to black. Chapter 14. She couldn't stop. She had to find him. If it wasn't for me, this wouldn't be unrealized nightmare. Why? How could I? Julie tried all of her father's contacts, had people searching nearby towns, following leads. She was so worried. His friends were right. She hadn't known him for long, but how she spoke to his friends. No, he wouldn't stay away like this for long. I just know it. She was at the end of the rope, and only one more person could help. Hopefully, I wouldn't hang myself. She walked to her father's office. It was too late in the day and her father wouldn't be there. There he was standing to meet her. She's never noticed how creepy Thomas looked when he smiled. I knew it wouldn't be long before you came crawling back. True, it was much longer than I expected. Thomas sounding pleased, dropping to her knees, pleading, "You must help me find him." The mayor thought the mayor thought of her on her thought of her on her thought of her on her knees for that. A great sent him stumbling back. "Please, Thomas." The motion scrambled his brain, and he nearly swung at her, causing the tormented woman to fall down the steps. "How could you plead for such a man? You tramp." Her eyes widened. He knows that He knows. That bastard knows, she thought to herself. She bolted away, but Thomas was no spring chicken and caught her after only a few steps. "Now I've cleaned my record." Smiling again, "Your father will be pleased, and he will be a guarantee for the hand." It was a long trip, maybe the longest she's ever been in. By the time they arrived, it was dark, and the awkward presence fell over their father's house. The father's house, even darker than the deepest woods, as if the house watched her approach. The house was silent, not an echo. Julie placed her hand on her ears. The silence ate at her. Pulling her by the upper arm, Thomas brought her to the library, where the black, silent heart of the house waited, facing the Gangachu fireplace. "Sit down." Although hesitant, she complied. Thomas shutting the door, quietly dismissing himself. "You have hurt me, but," turning towards her, "you have even in your incompetence brought me a very special gift." Jumping up. "What? Where's Marcus?" You didn't, but I." A smirk crossed his face for only a second, but she knew, but she seen it as clear as day. Chapter 15. Minds battered, they pushed on. They will complete this. If it was their last, all. The sun blazed, making it difficult to see. If nothing else, the ride eased their mind. Still no sign. As if both just picked up and left. They traveled the thickest woods. The far-off mountains kept moving closer and closer, until the wearied riders could make out the rocky face. Jasmine looked at Reed, and the saddest eyes, nodding. They headed back, just not the same. Slowly the forest began to thin out, the sum of the day more blurry than the 4 or 5 hour search. They even turned to their beautiful partners, which the horses, realizing how close they were. Then something clicked, a glary sound. They both turned to find themselves encaged. The iron cell must weigh a ton. Both of them couldn't budge it in. They couldn't budge it in the slightest. Day turned to night. Night into handcuffs. Well, waking up to a particular accent. Look, we hunt that beast. We catch the rat. Nine luck. The cage was surrounded. A hefty man backhanded an eerie-eyed man, stroking a goatee. You think they got a good price? Maybe. Yeah, another one spoke up. Now he'll have the whole set. Their eyes sprang forward towards each other, then out to their captors in a way that made most step back. They have Marcus. Chapter 16. She couldn't take it. Her father wouldn't stop. He had Marcus. She had to run. She didn't know where. Thomas would surely head to town. The woods, her only safe haven. Never looking back, she ran. Her ribs were blazing with each breath. Her legs numb, every part throbbing in her head. Sharp pains. By the time the sun was high overhead, she glowed with endless sweat, draining down her face, causing a momentary blindness, and led her right into a tree. As the flash resided, she sat motionless, only to realize the incarcerating pain, panting and holding her chest. She rocked back and forth, trying to dull the flames in her chest. Suddenly a sound caught her ear, a low, almost silent, whirling sound. Looking around the bush, she wiggled, and the sound stopped. She moved towards it slowly, snapping a branch, and out of the bush, a little brown-haired monkey thing darted out. But by the time it reached the next tree, it was limping and whining even ever louder. She walked to it. "Don't worry, little guy, I won't hurt you." Her voice was so soft, and the baby beast tried to run, but it was spent and just sat there, shivering in fear. Julianne noticed there was something stuck in the beast's little paw. Slowly she moved in, unlodging it, and wrapped the wound with a torn piece of her dress. The baby made its way up and began grunting as it walked around, faster and faster. It ran until a sprint speed where it began bouncing. Then out of the blue a large grunt came from behind her. As she saw the huge parent, she couldn't move. Hell, all she could see were its fangs. Chapter 17. Carried by carriage, the package was delivered. Reed's eyes circled the 4x4 carriage, adding the Jasmine explosive state. Neither said a word. If these fools knew where Marcus, not one word was needed. They arrived at the enormous house, the largest they'd ever seen. The flimsy wooden carriage brought them behind the building to another building on the property, where they were escorted inside. Big men, they thought, looking down at her handcuffs. They were carried through the lobby, down a hall to a locked door. "Marcus!" Jasmine's face flared in rage when no movement answered. They were chained to opposing walls, and after a friendly punch to the face, the mercenaries dispersed. Reed looked at Jasmine, who returned nodded. Using one hand, she pulled out a metal dip from her bracelet. She loved locks, something her father got her accustomed to. It only took a moment before she was at Reed, quietly. "We don't have time. Watch the door." Reed complied as she got to Marcus. Even though he regained consciousness, he was unable to hold himself up or understand who she was at all, and plummeted to the ground. Reed ran to him. "Marcus, I'm so," who in turn smiled and passed out before he could finish. Reed tossed him over his shoulders, and they made their way to the main entrance, only to find McCart and Darley standing in their direction. Realizing what was afoot, Darley pulled his two revolvers and sent a wave sprawling, nearly hitting all three with two bullets, cutting cutting into the doors. More of the goons joined in the tree shooting festival. At joining into the tree shooting festival, Reed kept pace with Jasmine, find with a newfound power, having found his friend. As they got far enough into the forest, men still in other paths, they gave their whistles a high breath, and soon after the dark horse came to their rescue, leaving the barefoot buffoons to go back to their barefoot. They weren't barefoot, they were just running back for themselves. Chapter 18. Captain Howard stood at his office window silent all morning. There was something aloof. He could smell it in the entrails, soaking the air. Reed had kept him up to date every couple of days. Now it's been nearly 3 weeks. At first, he'd figured it was simply a dry spell. No, this isn't right. Turning into the dark, Miss Merriweather, retrieve Captain Jackson for me. She jumped from the door, yes, sir, and sprang to her task. It wasn't long before Judson was there. Sir, I need you for a discreet mission. Yes, sir. Howard nodded. Something has learned of our special guests, and I need to know who and how. Understand? The corporal nodded, clanking his heels discernedly, clicking his toes discernedly. Make it so. I like a German. Chapter 19. The hunters didn't make it as far as they hoped. Unfortunately, the fools had strong horses, leaving little options to retreat. They dodged through the expanding forest as the bullets continued humming on assault. Jasmine smiled. Not a shot among them. Reed stayed silent, only maintaining his constant vigil on Marcus. Now not the best time to let him fall. Lucky the hunters knew the terrain intimately. Now, and slowly but surely, were working their way through the mammoth trees. And right as they were at the edge of sight, they stopped, hiding behind one of the trunks, watching the fools run by, fleeing in the opposite direction. Chapter 20. Immediately, Darrell knew something wasn't right. Looking around, he stopped. Split, he yelled with a hand motion, and looked over his shoulder. With all the tracks, it was impossible to pick out any particular print. After he hawk-eyed the area for roughly an hour, the rough man jumped off his horse in a usual raging spasm and began punching a tree. His horse curiously took a few steps back. Wonder if he's hit the horse. It wasn't long before the first of his men returned, a frightened look on their faces, and right as the first one spoke, Darrell flashed his revolver, removing his face entirely. He had never missed a target, and to go report it to someone made him expel the second person. He remembered saying, who in defiance dodged and took it to his arm. Darrell turned the gun to another. Go tell McCart we have no time for his personal pleasures. Give a look to his horse. Giving a look to his horse, who came closer. We have a beast to catch. The scared-faced man with a bullet in his arm was off before Darrell straddled the horse and headed to check on the other traps, his men quickly behind. Chapter 21. The corporal was excellent in his task. You deserve a promotion, Sergeant Jetson. Jetson clicked his heel. Thank you. Thank you, Captain. It was an easy task, far too simple for you. Hush up, Sarge. You already have the rank. Don't brown nose. Captain Howard walked behind his desk, sent in that useless private. Yes, sir. Jetson opened the door, letting the cowering man crawl in the darkest, the dark lit room had ever been. Yes, sir. Silence, slamming his hand down. I didn't give you permission to speak to me. No, I didn't. No, I don't recall I did. The private didn't move enough. The captain knew this man and could feel the fear in the air. No, private, you will tell me exactly who felt need to know my business. The now sweating private cleared his throat. Mr. Thomas Support, sir. The captain jumped up, sending his chair into the wall behind him. And who the hell is Thomas Support? After rubbing off the sweat. I believe he works for Mr. McCourt. You believe? Somehow the captain's face fell into shadow, which scared the shit out of the younger private, since he doesn't recall him moving. Maybe as much as the beast had, making him spontaneously run out of the captain's office. Jetson came in the room. Get some men, time to prove it. Sergeant Jetson clicked his toe. Yes, sir. Chapter 22. What luck, days upon days without even proof of existence. And could you guess? The very first trap they tried had a visitor, a 9-foot visitor. Well, hello there, you ugly bastard. Darrell grinned and grunt. Growling beast and vicious rocked the cage until it tipped over to its side. But even though these hunters looked more like bums, their equipment was state-of-the-art. And remember, Darrell took it as just that, an art. The Sasquatch roared in hatred, fangs claws, like sprawling about. The band retrieved the cage, not even sure the cage would hold, squeaking and all. Good. Triple-check the clamps. Let's get paid, shall we? But it wasn't time for money. Yet payment would be retrieved. But they knew. Dara watched man after man fall out. Then in a black streak it had to be a horse, sending another bloody carcass into the tree trunk. Decking and focusing, he watched a boomerang cut the arm off another, twisting to a tree. Twisting to a tree. 4 arrows nearly caught his head. Guns, allowing waiting now, turned towards the source, and unloaded a full clip. Reload! They were everywhere. Damn, how could this only be 3? And curiously decided to retreat. Jumping onto the carriage, they had to get a better. They started running permanently from the commotion. The three didn't even notice him leave. Chapter 23. There she is, Sarge. Steady, man. Try not to hit the intruder's horse. Jetson stood fast, sword up, awaiting Daryl's carnage. With his firing squad ready, exactly where's Reed said to be. Too bad he wasn't there to see the look on Daryl's eyes. He pulled hard, but the horse nearly trampled itself by the sheer weight of the cargo. Fire! Sweeping the sword down to a deafening blaze of powder. As the sergeant arrived at the body, he was startled by the appearance of the three dark masked figures. There you have your beast. No, everyone turned towards Jasmine. Don't even say my voice is prissy. And there she was, Julianne, was running as fast as her legs could carry her. Please don't do it. Wait. The sergeant pulled his gun away from the cage, looking up at the shrugging hunters. You can't shoot this animal. It's... ... I'm sorry, Miss McCart. The sergeant spoke up. I have orders, and besides, you don't know what you're talking about. And then he realized what she was watching. She was petting it, and unless his ears were still scrolled up from the attack, he could swear he hears a purring sound coming from the beast. Julianne looked up at the hunters. She's only protecting her child, and pointed up high into the nearest tree, and for sure there it was, fully recovered. Little baby cub fearfully awaiting its mother. Please take it from here, somewhere the humans won't disturb it. Her eyes pleaded, and one of the hunters looked out to the distance and tossed the Sarge a bag of gold. Wait, Jasmine said, but you're letting it out? Don't you know how many arrows I shot into that thing? The end.